my short talk about a significant part of garden design that I often talk to my clients about when we begin talking about what garden design is. And I wanted to just take a few minutes to introduce this concept because it's really powerful and an important place to start at your home. So, this is about using all the spaces around your home as garden. And I should say first, the first step in that is actually viewing and thinking of all of the spaces around your home as your garden. This is a very countercultural thing for people in the United States to do. I live in northwestern Pennsylvania. So, at the very least, I can speak for my area. When people in my area talk about their garden, what they usually mean is that patch about 10 feet long and 3 feet wide that's at the back of their property where they grow vegetables, where they grow their tomatoes, maybe some lettuce, some marigolds, or maybe their dahlias. It's that little bit at the back, or it is the 10 feet right in front of their foundation, which we would call also a foundation planting. That's their little bit of garden. And when they refer to it, their garden, that's what they're talking about. So I have a lot of clients who will sign up to work with me and they say, I want to work on my garden on that 10 feet right there on my property. And while I do actually quite a lot of helping people improve their foundation plantings, improve those little spaces at the back, and you certainly don't need to plant flowers and shrubs in spaces bigger than that. But even so, I want to help us think in a broader mindset about all of the space on our property thought of as our garden. And the place where this idea originated for me was in my extensive reading of British gardeners and a few books that I read 20 years ago. This is one of them, Rosemary Berry's Making of a Garden. So here's another favorite. I know if you're a reader here, you've heard me mention more than once, Succession Planting by Christopher Lloyd. And many books, many British books by John Brooks. I was struck 20 years ago by how when they write about their gardens, like this book and Rosemary's book, The Making of a Garden, she doesn't just talk about the floral spaces or even the tree spaces. She talks about all of the spaces in her 2-acre, what was her 2-acre plot, as being her garden. So even the driveway and even the little parking lot, it's a pretty, I've been to Barnsley House, and the parking lot just holds maybe 10 cars. So for a public, semi-public space, it is a small lot. The way she would speak about it is that being in her garden. So what I found when I was reading these British garden writers and thinking about what they were saying, and it struck me that that was really different than how we as Americans speak, which I have already explained, and that if I could, in my mind, change the way I thought, instead of just thinking, well, the garden is, of course, that part with the hostas and the forget-me-nots that I put in my shade path. Instead, if I could think, no, everything outside is my garden, then that helped me to be more intentional about all of the spaces that were in it. So even if you have your trash bins, that produces ideas like, I have trash bins there. But maybe I'll build a wooden box and put a little green roof on top of my trash bins because they're in my garden and I want it to use that space. And I think that this is especially powerful when you live in an urban space, because you are constrained by your neighbors, by the fences, by the alleyways. And it just opens up so many options for you in a mental way to think creatively about coming up with solutions for how you could beautify your space. And I wanted today to use my garden at Havenwood in a way to start to explain this a little bit more concrete. And so I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. I am on Substack here in this post called Looking Back, Beginning Havenwood. So I'm going to use some of these photos to show you what it has meant for me to, and my garden is almost 1 acre. So it's a large space, but whether a large space or a small space, thinking about all of your property as your garden can help you make these intentional decisions about what happens next. So you can see here, this is our plot that we bought here. You can see here's the outline of the boundary line, okay? And here's the house in the middle, all right? So, and there's my potting shed. If you've seen a remodel post, there's the shed on the diagram. So when we bought the house, this was an early Google photo that I saved. And you can see that the house is here in the middle. We have a driveway coming back here. Here's the old shed. And there's some, a lot of nice trees right here. But you see with this, even just this aerial, that's what I was saying about that little bit of planting. We have that right here by the house. We have a little bit of planting here. And there's actually a little bit of planting right here that you can't quite see in the shade. And that was that for the planting. And what a lot of people do when they buy a new house is they might think about, here's the planting here, right by the house. Here's the foundation planting here by the house. And, maybe if they wanted to grow vegetables or something, well, right back there at the very back is a bit of garden for vegetable garden. But what we were able to do at Havenwood, because we'd already been practicing actually at our first garden, Gilmore Gardens, to think about space, not just as the place where we're pushing plantings toward the edge of everything, but where we're actually thinking of the spaces as being part of the garden themselves. We were able to, instead of sticking things at the end, have some pretty dramatic changes. So this is a bit closer up here to the house. Here's the house, just to orient you. Here's the shed is just still back here in the shadow. But you can see between these two photos, I'll flip back right away. You can tell that here's the driveway that went across this way. And we chose to bring it up this way. And it looks quite a bit shorter, and up to what would become the garage right here. Actually, this is before that. But point being, when I was able to look at that space and think about using all of my available space in the best way possible, I realized that this house that is on almost a 1 acre lot had no backyard. And because our driveway came all the way in here, we could be sitting at the table here for dinner and we'd have cars pulling up. People actually thought this was an alleyway. And so we had this constant back and forth and the swing set for the children right here, but people would come back and drive around our backyard and then drive out. And so that was one thing I knew needed to change, and we needed some more space. But if I hadn't allowed myself to consider the fact that that driveway space was still part of the garden, then I may never have gotten there. And to look at how to be flexible about how I could adapt that driveway to be a better part of the garden. That's what really got me there. Now I know everyone's not going to be able to do this. We were really fortunate in the way it happened. It was actually very inexpensive for us to flip the rubble and the dirt, and we didn't have to bring in a lot of materials the way it worked out in order to create this lawn. Took the rubble and dumped it here, took the topsoil and dumped it here. And so it ended up being very slick. But the same idea applies whether you're talking big dramatic change or small change. The idea that we wanted to think about the spaces around our home and not just to walk at the edge of things, but to be able to walk into parts of the garden and to think about all of our space as being somewhere that was going to be able to work for us in the way we wanted it to. So this diagram here is rough, but and not all lined up correctly, but I just used my drawing tool and I tried to sketch out where some of these areas came in into our thinking. So we have the vegetable garden, the lawns here. Here's the long border. The pond is actually off screen right here in this picture. We have the ruin garden here, the hot garden, the birch walk, the cottage garden, the entry garden, and then we have 4 long views and walks down through this wooded area. So instead of using only the minimum of space and thinking, oh, well, this is garden back here, this is garden here, this is garden right here, and then leaving all this blank space, this wall-to-wall carpet, right? Instead of doing that, by using our space to say, no, the lawn is going to be here. It's going to be contained in this space. The vegetable garden is going to be here, contained in this space. The cottage garden is here, contained here. We were able to break it up and create these different areas to walk through. And if you have a smaller property, these areas can still coexist in a sense, but they're just smaller. So I think what the language gives to us when we say that the whole space is garden and not just these little spaces at the back, what it does for us is it gives us permission to plant something other than grass, other than turf in those spaces. And a lot of us are realizing how actually turf is not the best, most sustainable, most ecological practice for our spaces, that we can, we might choose just to do like I've done in the birch walk and not mow some of the lawn and let it grow longer and add some wildflowers to it. You can have choices. And I think that's the big thing, is that I like for my clients to know that they actually have more choices when they think about their whole space as being your garden. Whatever you have, your basketball hoop, your children's slide, that all of that sits inside, everything outside your home sits in your garden. And so it starts to give you this freedom to be able to make choices about areas that you have never considered changing, maybe making a bit different. And so for instance, this is part of why gardens that are designed are more cohesive, and why you will see them. Here's another big garden example, but because a designer does exactly what I'm saying. They consider all of the space. Here's a house here and their driveway here, and they considered, what was set in stone. And I'm sure some of these are older mature trees that they added to this plan, but everything else they start to build up. And this has a very formal design, or semi-formal design, because it's set on these axes like this. And I've talked about that semi-formal and formal design in some of my other classes. But there are many different ways and different styles of gardens that you can use. So here's one that's much more loose and modernistic. But the point is that they are allowing all of the available space to be considered and to be used in an appropriate manner. So that's something that I find as a real reversal in thought for some homeowners, and it also just frees you up. Shouldn't be a burden if you're thinking, oh no, she's saying we have to plant all this. It's actually not what I'm saying. You could literally plant nothing else or change anything else, but if you think in your mind, everything outside is my garden, I guarantee that it will start to change your thinking and give you some more creative solutions that might really be helpful to you. And so it's just a change of mindset today, and something that I realized at the intersection where I sit of US and UK garden culture. I realized that was a difference in the way we were speaking, our cultures were speaking about our garden spaces, and that by starting to look at how, this British culture, which so many of us admire for their gardens, how they were speaking, and then thinking about how we could change our language and speak of it that way. I think it really opens it up for us, even culturally speaking, for us to value our gardens in the United States.